Hey, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into what is honestly the single most important concept in modern Next.js, the difference between server and client components. Seriously, if you can get this one thing, everything else just kind of clicks into place. All right, let's get into it.
But first, let's talk about a problem I guarantee you've run into. You click on a link, you're excited to see some content, and you get, well, this, a blank white screen. It feels like it lasts forever, right, before anything actually shows up? So why does that happen? And more importantly, how do we fix it?
Well, in a traditional React app, here's what's happening behind the scenes. Your browser asks for a page, and the server sends back basically a blank shell. It's an empty HTML file. Then, your browser has to download this huge chunk of JavaScript, run all of that code, and only then, after all that waiting, does React even start to build the page right there in your browser. That delay is exactly what causes that blank screen.
Now Next.js comes along and solves this with a really brilliant and kind of simple idea. It just splits the work between two places. We have the world of the server and the world of the client. And understanding what each of these worlds does is the absolute key to building incredibly fast websites.
Think of it like this. The server is the factory. This is where all the hard work gets done. It's building the structure, the HTML, it's fetching all the data from the database, getting everything assembled. And then you have the client. That's your browser, which is like the fancy showroom. It's where the user gets to see the final product and interact with it, clicking buttons and playing with the features. The factory builds it, the showroom displays it. So let's start in the factory and talk about server components. And here's the really important part. In modern Next.js, every single component you write is a server component by default. It's the powerhouse doing all that heavy lifting behind the scenes before you even see anything.
And man, can they do a lot. Because they run on the server, they can do things that would be way too insecure to do in a browser. They can connect directly to your database, read files from the file system, and use your secret API keys without ever, leaking them to the person browsing your site. They handle all the data fetching before the page even gets sent. And the result? The user sees your content almost instantly.
But since all this stuff is happening on the server, there's a catch. There's a trade-off. Server components can't be interactive at all. They can't use useState or uEffect. They can't listen for an on-click from a user. They don't even know what window or local storage are, because those things only exist in a browser. They're basically just for showing stuff, that's it. So how do we add our buttons and forms?
For that, we finally step out of the factory and into the showroom. We need to meet the client component. This is how we bring our static pages to life. And it all kicks off with one very simple, very powerful line of code.
It's this, just this one line at the very top of your file, use client. You can think of this directive as a one-way door. The second you put in a file, you're telling Next.js, hey, this component right here, and anything it imports, it belongs in the browser. It needs JavaScript to work. And once you step through that door, you're in the browser world to stay. And once you're on the client side, the world of interactivity just opens right up. Suddenly, you can use all the tools you're used to from React. We're talking useState, uEffect, all the hooks. You can handle on-click events for your buttons. You can access the browser itself. This is where you build all your fun stuff, your interactive forms, your pop-up modals, your drop-down menus.
Okay, so you might be wondering, how does a plain button that the server spat out suddenly become clickable? Well, this happens through a process called hydration. The analogy I love is a dried-out sponge. The server sends you the HTML. That's the sponge. It has the right shape, but it's stiff, it's useless. Then the JavaScript arrives in your browser. That's the water. It soaks into that static HTML, attaching all the event listeners and making it spring to life.
All right, so we've got our server components, the factory workers, and our client components, the showroom staff. Now, the most critical part is figuring out how they work together. And to do that, you have to follow one golden rule.
The rule is actually pretty simple. You can totally put a client component inside a server component. No problem. The factory can build a space for an interactive element. But, and this is the big but, you can't go the other way. You cannot import a server component into a client component. Remember that one-way door? Once you're in use client land, you're there for good. You can't reach back into the server.
But what if you need to? What if you have, say, an interactive layout component that needs to display some rich content that can only be fetched on the server? You might think you're stuck, but for that, there's this really elegant, clever pattern we can use.
Okay, check this out. It's called the children prop pattern, and here's the magic. First, way back on the server, your server component runs and gets turned into just plain old HTML.
Then, that finished block of HTML gets handed over to your client component as a prop, specifically the children prop. And here's the cool part. The client component has no idea where that HTML came from. It doesn't care. Its only job is to decide, should I show this or should I hide it? It gets the benefits of server rendering without ever running server code. It's the best of both worlds.
Okay, enough theory. Let's see how this actually plays out in a real-world example and why it makes pages so much faster.
So imagine a typical blog page, right? You've got the nav bar at the top. Does it need to be interactive? Nope. Server component. The main blog post content? It's just text. Server component. The list of related posts and the footer? Same thing, just displaying data. Server components. The only things on this entire page that need interactivity are those little buttons for liking and sharing. Those become tiny client components.
So what's the payoff for thinking this way? It's huge, absolutely huge. Because of this architecture, something like 95% of this page can be pre-built on the server and ships with literally zero JavaScript. That means the page appears almost instantly for the user, and the only JavaScript they have to download and run is for those two tiny buttons.
So if you remember one thing from this entire explainer, let it be this. Your goal is to push useClient as far down the component tree as you possibly can. You want it on the leaves of the tree, not the trunk. Don't make a whole page a client component if only one tiny button needs it. Isolate that interactivity into the smallest component possible.
And that brings us to one final thought experiment. Let's say you have a huge, complex page, but on that page, there is just one single button that needs useState to work. Where does that useClient directive go? On the button component itself, or on the entire page? If you know the answer to that, then you've totally grasped the core idea that makes modern Next.js so powerful.